For the longest time, the Detroit Lions could never seem to get out in front of the rest of the NFL when it came to being innovative. But now, the Detroit Lions have not only reversed this trend, but they are now definitely out in front. We're going to talk about it. Stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are? And what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. My friends, for this episode here, this was an episode that literally kind of just all came to me on freaking, yesterday for Veterans Day. And it was just an idea that literally, as soon as I started thinking the process through, it was like building blocks. It was just like, oh, build this on top of that, on top of that. And it just literally just built itself over the span of hours. Now, let me just try and give you all a really quick breakdown here of what we're getting ourselves into. If we realistically want to think about how the Lions have transformed over the years, it's been nothing short of miraculous. We're talking about a team that from 2021 until now has gone from a joke of a franchise that was called laughable losers to now they're considered one of the best organizations in the NFL that teams literally respect and that players want to come and play for. And they're considered Super Bowl not only contenders, but favorites. For that to happen literally in less than 4 full actual years is nothing more than a freaking testament to the Lions' vision and their commitment to their process. Many would like to think that what I'm trying to highlight here is Brad Holmes' drafting process or his GM building skills. And you know what? There's definitely something about that goes into this concept because, as everybody already knows, Brad Holmes' draft record, his GM record, is just absolutely exemplary. I mean, you just take a look at all the draft picks that we've had since 2021 that we've damn well hit on. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If somebody were to actually sit down and take a look at every single draft picks from 2021 until now and do a measurement of cost versus, actual return on value, I don't even think it would be damn close to the amount of, value that we have gotten back from our draft picks versus what we put into them. And I'm not only talking about in position, regards to trades, so on and so forth. I mean, Brad Holmes has just been ridiculous in this regard. And it's been a huge reason for the Lions' success. There's no two ways around it. But while all the things I just said are true about Brad Holmes, I believe firmly that the Lions' success comes from a much, much simpler concept, but an overall more powerful concept. And this concept is what I am trying to tell people is what has dumbfounded and outsmarted the NFL. And I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about other coaches, other teams, and the NFL league office itself. Because not only has it done that, but it has also given a profound connection to our lives as Americans. And simply put, what I'm talking about here is Dan Campbell's grit culture. Hence the reason why I'm wearing the hat today. Now, I know some people, as soon as I just said that, they're going to be like, well, David, how the hell is this a profound, new revelation here? How is this, something that's, showing the Lions outsmarted anybody? The grit culture for the Detroit Lions has been around since 2022, so you're not exactly giving us anything new here. Not in terms of actual information as far as, what the grit culture is, because we already know what it is. But understanding how and what it does in pertinence to other teams, to the rest of the NFL, but also to ourselves as a culture as the United States, putting that all together, putting that into a mixing pot and making it make sense, nobody's done that yet. So if you just stick with me here, I'm about to take you guys all on a journey that by the time I'm done with it, you guys are going to be literally thinking, wow. I guarantee you that. So let's start real quickly here. To understand this journey, obviously we have to do two things. We have to take a quick review through history, and obviously we also have got to take a look at what culture truly means here. So, just going to do a quick recap of history because I'm not trying to take forever on this. We already know that pretty much since the 2000s, the Lions have been a joke of a franchise. I can say that because I've endured it, I lived it, I went through it. And everybody else that's been there already knows the same thing. Let's just call it for what it is. Through those 20-something years that I'm talking about, I would say there was only 2 other teams that quite literally had such a bad reputation as we did. And those teams were probably the Raiders and the Browns. But when you take a look at what the Lions were doing through those 20 years, it was literally wash, rinse, repeat. We were doing the same damn mistakes over and over again. Bad coaching hires, bad GM hires, bad draft picks, and just absolutely had no interest from the ownership. The ownership was very detached. It was like it was there, but it was not a part of it. It was kind of like a freaking silent partner, if you will. So, okay, we go through those 20 years. Absolute misery, where we had very little success because we had winning seasons, but we had no meaningful accomplishments. Never won a division title, never won a playoff game. Now we get to 2020. Martha Firestone Ford steps aside, gives the reins of the ownership role to her daughter, Sheila. Sheila comes in and starts doing things vastly different than anybody had done as far as her family, as far as ownership had done prior to her. She was involved in the team. She was in meetings. She was making sure she had a finger on the freaking pulse of the team, wanting to know what was going on. She comes in. Her first decision is to decide to keep Matt Patricia and, Bob Quinn for one more year to see if they can actually prove they can turn things around. Not a popular decision at the time, but I understand why she did it. She was brand new to the role. She wasn't quite yet ready to make a decision like what she did. And let's call it for what it is. It's a good damn thing she didn't. Because I would be willing to bet you this. Had she done it, I don't think we would have had freaking Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes at the time. Again, I'm a very, I'll just say I'm a Christian and I believe this. Things happen for a reason. I believe that when Sheila fired the 2 men that we're talking about, that was because it was supposed to happen at that time. Well, let's go through that little thing right there. Season starts. It starts off okay, but by Thanksgiving, it was over with. Because Thanksgiving, the Lions go and play, obviously, their normal Thanksgiving game, and we get absolutely embarrassed, blown out on television by the Texans, the same team we just played, 41-25. 2 days after, Matt Patricia, Bob Quinn, they're gone. So, okay, now we've gone through that. Very, very shortly after that happened, freaking Sheila, Rod Wood, Chris Spielman, Barry Sanders, they start sitting down. They're going through meetings. They're understanding and establishing what they're looking for in a GM and a head coach. And very shortly after the actual regular season, mercifully was done, by the way, for the 2020 season, the Lions established who they wanted as their GM by hiring Brad Holmes on January 14th of 2021. And then almost a week later, on January 20th of the same year, that was when Dan Campbell was announced as the head coach. Okay, now we've gotten to the Campbell-Holmes regime. Now we can start actually talking about this more than just an abstract concept. Because let's understand something here. When Campbell got hired, Campbell came in and he was, let's just be fair here, he was different from anything the NFL had seen as far as a head coach. I don't care what you want to say. Campbell was very different. He was very different in every single way. And he was certainly different than anything the Lions had seen. Because when Campbell got in there, he came in there and his perception of what the Lions were was probably more accurate than anything or anybody could envision because he understood the situation not only from a football concept, but also from a culture concept. Let's call it for what it is, folks. Dan Campbell knew what he was getting into when he requested and got the job. Because if you think about it here, as soon as Campbell got hired, the atmosphere, the freaking vibe, the tone of the organization changed instantaneously. It changed overnight. And the reason why it did is because, like I said, Campbell was different than anything we had seen before. Let's first and foremost just understand the head coaches that we had had in those 20 prior seasons to him and how he was different from them. I'm going to put this very clearly, so understand what I say here. When we hired the guys that we did, at the time, At the time we hired them, we were hiring them and they were considered to be either experts in whatever, side of the football they were in, or even more so, they were like considered these special gurus who knew stuff that nobody else knew. Because if you go down the list, Marty Morningwed was considered an expert in offense. Steve Mariucci, the same thing. Rod Marinelli was considered an expert or a guru in freaking the defensive side of the ball. Jim Schwartz was considered an expert in his side of the ball on defense as well. Jim Caldwell was considered an expert on offense, but he was also considered a quarterback guru because he had worked with a lot of quarterbacks and made them successful. And Matt Patricia was just considered a defensive guru overall. All of these guys came in and they were like, the smartest guy in the classroom kind of thing. They were like, oh, well, I know stuff that nobody else knows. When Campbell came in, that was not the perception at all. Campbell was considered a very down-to-earth football kind of viewpoint. He was like, listen, I'm not going to give you coach speak. I'm not going to try and talk circles around you. I'm going to be very straightforward and blunt about what I'm trying to do here. Which was vastly different than anything we had seen and the NFL had seen. Because typically when you got into these points where the NFL would do their interviews for new coaches, they would say all the same thing. Campbell was like, I'm not going with the same script here. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to tell you like it is. And that's exactly what he did. And that kind of gave the awkward perception, or rather I should say the inaccurate perception from the analysts in the outside sporting world, that Campbell was nothing more than a rah-rah guy who was more of a meathead because he looked more bronze than brain. But if you talk to anybody who actually was in the NFL as far as part of organizations, coaches, players, they knew the man knew his stuff about football. He just wasn't going to try and freaking look like he was the smartest guy in the room. And then the other thing that Campbell did that was different when he got in was that how do I put this? He didn't present himself as an outsider coming in trying to save the organization, trying to save a sinking ship. Rather, he presented himself as like, listen, I'm just like you guys. I'm an insider. I know what it's like, what we've been through, because I played for this organization. I lived here for 3 years. I have understood exactly what it means to be a part of Detroit and to be a part of the Detroit Lions. Campbell already knew exactly the type of culture that had been here in Detroit for years. It was a loser's mindset. It was a defeated mindset. There was no sense of hope. So Campbell was coming in and like, listen, I'm not trying to give you guys false hope here. I'm going to tell you all exactly what's going on here. We're going to come in. We're going to be hardworking. We're going to be blue collar. We are going to do what we need to do here. I'm not going to try and sell you all a bag of goods. And the other thing that was vastly different was Campbell's approach to when he got hired. Typically, when coaches were getting hired by the Detroit Lions in the past, you didn't necessarily get the sense that they were excited to be here, but rather it was like, listen, it's a job, I'm getting paid, let's make this work. Campbell was the exact opposite. He literally said that he wanted the job bad. He wanted to be here. And let's put it quite frankly, in the 2021 NFL head coaching hiring process, I can guarantee you this, ain't nobody wanting to come here. So the fact that Campbell was enthusiastic, damn near I would say kind of like, imploring the Lions hire him, was vastly different. You had a guy that not only wanted to be here, but he wanted to turn things around because he understood the true history and culture that had happened here. So, okay, now we get all the way through that. Now we're talking about actual football. First year and a half of the Campbell-Holmes regime was not nice. I mean, you go to the first 7 games of 2022, the Lions' record under Campbell and Holmes was 4-19-1. It was dismal. It was bad. It was so bad that I don't care what anyone wants to say or tries to sweep this under the rug or think it didn't happen, but there were podcasters, there were fans, there were people who were openly starting to talk about whether or not Campbell should have been fired. And I was one of those guys. I was like, listen, don't freaking say it because you will get what you're saying. You better be careful what you wish for. Do not pull the plug. And it was a damn good thing that Sheila and the rest of them didn't do that Sheila stood beside and said, listen, I'm going to trust this process because I'm not going to get cold feet early. Because let's think about this, folks. Ever since the Lions started out 4-19-1 under Campbell, after that start, you want to know what they've been since then? And I'm including playoffs here. Since they started out 4-19-1, they have now, up to current day point, been 30-9. That is a vast turnaround. So for many people, they're going to be like, man, it was such a sudden freaking change. No, it wasn't. It might have looked like it was sudden because, we go from 1-6 in 2022 to finishing the year 8-2, finishing 9-8. So to everybody on the outside, and most people that were just looking at the situation, they'd be like, it was a sudden change, sudden turnaround. But I'm going to tell you this right now. The turnaround that we saw was not sudden. It looked like it was sudden because of the results. But rather, the change, the turnaround was something that had been planted and cultivated and consistently nurtured and reinforced since day one. It just didn't have an identity until the 2022 season when these bad boys started coming out. And that was when the grit culture was officially named and, quite frankly, born, as far as to what we could call it. But the culture, even though it didn't have a name or was not officially recognized, it had always been there since Campbell walked in the door. Because Campbell had built and instilled that culture set on several simple principles. And some of these principles we already know, but I would say 5 of the main ones are these ones. Number 1, we will not be outworked. Nobody is going to outwork us. Number 2, we are always looking to improve, whether we win or whether we lose. I kind of put this within the phrase of, hey, success isn't permanent and failure isn't fatal. We can always find ways to improve regardless of whether we're winning or losing. We have to constantly look for ways to improve. Number 3, the freaking mindset around the team was that. It's a team mindset. More we, less I. The next thing was also that, if you think about it, the Lions were not interested in trying to find guys that could literally go up like this in terms of progression. Campbell has said it multiple times before, and it's become a mantra for the team. We're looking for slow, steady progression. We're looking for what is sustainable, not something that just instantaneously gives us what we want and then it burns out, it plateaus. And then the final thing, which is probably the most identifiable of the grit culture, is that, listen, we will never quit. We are not going to give up. We will fight, scratch, claw until the very end. Those are the principles that most people should either know or have an understanding of when it comes to the grit culture. And that was instilled from day one that Campbell walked in the door. Now, I'm just going to say this right now. The principles that I just talked about provide the framework for the culture, provide the actual, structure for it. But I'm going to just say this. Those ideals do not actually give the grit culture the success that it has. And it has not been the way the Lions have outsmarted the entire NFL. Because listen, you can have a framework, you can have a plan, you can have a system, if you will. But if you don't have the crucial key ingredient, it ain't gonna work. What exactly do I mean here? Think about when Campbell got hired in 2021. Prior to Campbell getting hired, there was, and I quite literally mean this, there was a ridiculous amount of effort by teams trying to find the next young, hotshot, creative head coach that was an offensive guru. I mean, just think about this, folks. Rams, Sean McVay, 49ers, Shanahan, Cardinals, Kingsbury, the Commanders, Jay Gruden back when he was hired, when the Broncos hired Josh McDaniels from the Patriots, when the Eagles brought Chip Kelly up from the freaking college ranks, when the Chiefs brought in Todd Haley, the Vikings bringing in Kevin O'Connell. I mean, for like a good solid, freaking 7, 8, 9 years. That was what teams were looking for. They were trying to find the next hotshot offensive-minded guru that would make their team some sort of 1999 Rams rebirth. And the funny thing about it is that if you go back and you take a look at all the names I just mentioned, only 3 of them are still head coaches at this point, and that's McVay, Shanahan, and O'Connell. The rest, all were fired. They are either now coordinators or some sort of special advisor. They might be back in college. They might be in some other capacity, but they're not head coaches in the NFL. And that's because they didn't have what they needed to have to make their team successful, at least not for a long-term period. Now, why that's important is because when Campbell was hired, I would say that at the time he was hired, again, very crucial I say that, at the time he was hired, he was probably the first of a new wave of hirings that was focusing on trying to get former players as head coaches. Now, the reason I say that is because this is not the first time we've seen head coaches been hired before in the past. But when Campbell was hired, it was this massive wave, this massive push of, okay, we want to get more former players to be our head coaches. Because let's just think about this. Let's go back and take a look at the hiring process of all these other head coaches that are currently, right now, former NFL players that are coaching as head coaches. Campbell was hired in 2021, and I'm saying that because he was of the new wave. Because prior to him, you had guys like, Mike Vrabel, you had Jim Harbaugh, you had freaking Frank Reich and Doug Peterson, who had been hired by other teams sporadically throughout the freaking, early to late 2010s. And some of them got secondary jobs later on. But when Campbell got hired in 2021, as soon as he was hired, take a look what then happened. Kevin O'Connell was hired by the Vikings in 2022. Doug Peterson was rehired by the freaking, he was hired by another team, the Jaguars, in 2022. Todd Bowles was hired by another team, by the freaking, Bucks in 2022. Oh, you just go down the list. DeMeco Ryans, 2023. I mean, there was a massive push after Campbell got hired to be like, okay, we need to get more of these players to be head coaches. Now, why do you suppose that's the case? The reason why is because once the rest of the NFL kind of figured out that having former players to be head coaches was a good thing because it allowed the coaches to connect deeper with the players, they started trying to mimic that process. And the reason why is because the Lions were able to prove very, very quickly that they had something that the rest of the NFL had not yet quite caught on. And that's where the outsmarting factor comes in here. Let me show you what I mean here. When you think about it, folks, the framework that I was talking about for the grit culture, it is very good because everything about it is exactly what, as a football team, you should want. But it simply does not work unless you have the man that brings along the heartbeat of it. For something like this to work, the coach has to embody what he's presenting, and it has to be genuine. If you think about it, Campbell's entire freaking professional football career, as a player, as a coach, he has had to constantly overcome the odds by working his ass off, by having sheer determination and doing whatever the team required of him when he was there, whether it was as a coach or as a player. And then, on top of that, this is where I'm going to start tying in the whole America concept. Campbell comes from a very, very small rural area in freaking central Texas. He was part of a very blue-collar working mindset. He's been that way since he was a little kid. When you combine both of these things, and then you couple the fact that he was playing in Detroit, he understands that culture, he understands the city, he understands the actual football team itself. Campbell, as we know, literally, instantaneously connected with people because he was able to literally not only sympathize, but empathize. He knew exactly what it was like. And since many of the players that we have on the roster have had similar situations to him, he could connect very quickly and people would understand him. And it's like, listen, when you have people that understand you, it's amazing what you can get done. Think about the players that the Lions have on their roster right now that just at instant value you can think of have gone through the same things that Campbell has gone, whether it's not the same thing or not, but the same adversity, the same having determination to overcome stuff. Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tim Patrick, Jake Bates, freaking Jamison Williams. All of these guys have had to overcome adversity through one point or the other. And they've all been able to get through it because Campbell's like, listen, man, if you just do the work, if you just trust me, if you just stick with me, we will get through this dark phase. There is a light at the end of the tunnel here. And when you think about it, the reason why this has worked and the reason why the Lions have been able to outsmart the NFL, take a look at what the players have said ever since that he's become the head coach. They've all said the same thing. He's not fake. He is the same guy every single day, win or lose. The consistency factor is probably one of the biggest things that an NFL head coach can have, because for players, consistency gives them a sense of security. It doesn't make them think that things are going to change. And as we fans have seen, along with the players, saying that he is, he is one of the most open head coaches, one of the most honest people you will ever find out of a head coach. He genuinely cares for his players. The players will know this. They know how to spot a fake. They know how to spot a phony. There's nothing about Campbell that is fake. There's nothing about Campbell that's insincere. I mean, we found that out very, very quickly. Just go back to the freaking Hard Knocks speech where he's out on the practice field and he is like literally trying to tell his players, he's like, listen, I'm not crazy. He's like, I'm doing this for your benefit. He's like, all I ever think about is you guys. He's like, that's all I freaking think about. That right there, when you're able to have that raw emotion, that raw outpouring of connection, it connects on such a profound level that it's like, listen, it's more than words can describe. And again, when it comes to the cut time periods, we've heard about how Campbell hates that. He hates cutting players because he understands what it's like to go through that. Hey, you're trying to make a team. You're busting your ass. You're giving everything you got. But sometimes it's not enough. He hates doing that to players because he loves players. He is a player's coach because he understands what they go through. Now, how does this tie back to America? Let's just call it for what it is, folks. America is not easy. People want to say that it's this or that, but realistically what America is, it's an idea. And the idea, at least at the basic core value that most of us would probably say is that, listen, you are the commander of your own destiny. You control what you're going to do. But in order for you to get ahead in life, it's always been, you have to be willing to work hard. You have to be willing to literally do the things that people don't want to do to try and get ahead. And that sometimes means you're going to have to freaking, push through adversity. You're going to have to work harder when sometimes it might not seem fair. But you know what? As everybody has said, life isn't fair. You're going to have to deal with crap you don't want to deal with. But if you go through it, you will be better for it because you will have earned the experience of saying, hey, I know what this is like. I can now pass it along to somebody else. The best way I can put it for why Campbell has been able to get this team the way it is and allowed the Lions to outsmart people is this. Campbell, he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. He practices what he preaches. The best way I can put this in putting it into like an actual phrase is go back to the Bible in James 2:17. It says, thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Put simply, it's like, listen, I can say all the right things. I can say I believe, I can say I will do. But unless you actually do it, unless you actually provide the physical works, the physical manifestation of what you're saying, it's dead and everybody knows it's dead. They know it has no value. That's the difference. I'm not saying that other coaches don't have, that, because I can't speak to them. But I can speak to Campbell. And there's a reason why the Lions have become one of the most successful teams over the last couple of years. And there's a reason why other teams are trying to get their hands on other freaking NFL former players. They have seen what Dan Campbell and the Lions have done, and they're like, man, this is something. This is unbelievably something that we want to get our hands on. But there's one thing they're not going to understand, which is where we've outsmarted the NFL. You can't get what we have because you don't have the man to make it work. I'm sorry. You cannot, I said it before with the Lions, you cannot try and transplant another culture here to Detroit because it has to be genuine to Detroit. The same thing's going to be applicable to anywhere else. You can't transplant freaking Campbell's culture anywhere else because the culture is based off of Campbell himself. It's not based off of anything else. It's Campbell pouring himself out and realizing that, hey, by connecting to the players in the community around me, that's what builds culture. Not some freaking, 5-10 rules or whatever process. It's people that builds culture. And that's why Campbell's personality, his mindset, it fit the city of Detroit and the team like a glove. And when we hired somebody that would build a culture and would be a leader of men, that was the smartest thing the Lions ever did, because they decided to go against the grain of what the NFL had been trying to do forever. Oh, find the smart guy, find the young hotshot head coach that is going to turn everything around. The Lions were like, nope, we're going against the grain. We're going to go with what we know is going to fit us. And ever since then, everybody has been scratching their heads trying to figure out how in the hell have the Lions been able to do what they've been able to do. And the simple answer to that is this: the Lions went their own way, and they have been proving people wrong by outsmarting them at every single turn since that day. That is how the Lions have outsmarted the rest of the NFL. Very long, very drawn out, but very well worth it. Having said that, I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these three things: like, comment, and subscribe to the subscribe to the channel, pardon me. If you like what you saw and you had subscribed in the past and have not done so yet already, please make sure you hit that channel notification bell icon so that way you guys can always come back to my channel and never miss any more content. Please share the content so that way we can continue to grow the channel and we can continue to get new viewership in. And with that being said, whether you've been a long time viewer or this is the first time viewing me, hopefully you guys got something out of it. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. I also hope that everybody out there has something in their life that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends, and until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.